Hello and welcome to Château de Landonvillers. I've owned this house for some 30 years. I'm going to show you some amazing things. I have a collection of Byzantine art. You'll see some pretty motley objects. You'll also see a strange instrument. So, it's really an exceptional house located near Metz, just a few kilometers from the German border or Luxembourg. So, to tell you a little about the history of the house, the first chateau was built around 1580 by Thomas du Chat, who was the first lord of Landonvillers. Then, during the 17th and 18th centuries, it was somewhat altered. Many noble Lorraine families lived here, including Chevalier Michel de Saint-Blaise, who gave his coat of arms to the village. And then, as you know, it was the Ugly War, 1870-1871, when Alsace-Moselle became Reichland, land of empire. It was annexed by Wilhelm II. And in 1890, Wilhelm II bought Château d'Urville, just a few kilometers from here. And in 1891, one of his acquaintances, Dr. John von Haniel, a sort of prefect in the Ruhr, bought this castle because it was good form for German notables to settle in newly conquered lands. And so he bought this chateau, which looked nothing like what you see here, and then from 1904 to 1906, he had it modified by Bodo Ebhardt. Bodo Ebhardt, who was something of a German Viollet-le-Duc, who rebuilt castles in Germany, so a bit like Viollet-le-Duc in France. And the owner wanted to have his fortified castle. He wanted to have his little Hockenigsberg, and he wanted it in stone from his homeland, from North Germany, from the Paderborn region. So he had all these blocks of stone brought in by train to build his fantasy. So it's a rather poetic place, as you'll see. I'll take you inside. We're going to enter the winter garden. I'd like to introduce you to the winter garden, which is a delightful place to read or relax. It's a very charming place to have a cup of tea in spring or autumn. So what you see here are these steel bars. So you can see that this is modern architecture. But why? Because this part of the chateau we see here was built in the early 20th century. And there used to be a stucco vault here, but due to a lack of waterproofing, it became waterlogged. That was before my time, and of course it fell down. But it's interesting when you see this mix of very medieval architecture with very modern elements. Here we have two Carrara marbles. On the left, we see Hercules at the bottom of Hell's Cave with the German miners' salute, Glück auf, meaning welcome back, good climb, symbolizing the work of the mine. Here on the right, we have Vulcan with the Cyclops, representing the work of the forge. So mine and forge, the origins of the Haniel family fortune. I'll now take you through the main halls, the Great Hall of the Knights. And as you can see, it's quite monumental with this huge vault. Here, you have the sideboard from the Haniel era. This bar was built by my predecessors, whose main activity was to make libations here. It was important to them, but fortunately with woodwork elements from the old castle, so we kept it. It's quite handy. And sometimes we can have a glass of champagne when we have a little concert here. Here we have the coats of arms of many German dynasties on the stained glass windows. So John von Haniel, his title of nobility, he only got it in 1899, and we think he actually wanted to tie in a bit with the great German families. So, there's a nice story. It's said that the emperor never came here because his imperial chateau at Courcelles-Chaussy is in fact much more modest than Mr. Haniel's chateau. So it was a little jealousy feud, reminding us a little of Fouquet and Vaux-le-Vicomte perhaps, but it ended well. At Fouquet's a little less so. So there was a little jealousy, and the Kaiser didn't like Mr. Haniel very much. Now I'm going to show you a very interesting architectural detail not immediately apparent. So the architect integrated here large sliding doors. This is made of German oak, it's very sturdy. And it was to separate the rooms, so while the gentlemen were perhaps talking business and wars in the great hall, the ladies could retire for a little liqueur in our music room. We have a few paintings here. We have Charlemagne, for example, who must not have been missing here, and also Saint-Firmin. These are paintings by a man called Kwiatkowski, a Polish painter and friend of the Chopin family. We have an interesting piano here, an Erard piano, which is actually the twin of Richard Wagner's piano that he had in Venice at the Palazzo Vendramin. The piano you see today in Venice is no longer the original one at all. So this is really the twin of Richard Wagner's piano, which came to me through roundabout means. Wagner said it came to him like a sign of the Grail, and it arrived to us in exactly the same way. So speaking of music, I wanted to introduce you to something exceptional, which is this thing here. So maybe you can guess what it is. It's a musical instrument. So it's kind of the predecessor of the synthesizer. It's the only classical musical instrument invented in the 20th century by the Russian engineer Leon Theremin. And the special thing about it is that you can play it without touching it. Here, maybe I'll play a few notes for you. So it needs to warm up a little bit. So I need my pianist who will accompany me. Of course, we could go playing theremin for a long time, and I'm sure that you know this instrument because in the science fiction films of the 50s or 60s, when the flying saucers arrive or take off, you could hear that sound effect. And that was done with theremin too. Here, I'll show you eventually the spelling. Theremin. So it's very, very rare and difficult to master. So excuse me, I'm practicing, but it's hard. So now we're going to move on to the oldest part of the chateau, which is the Renaissance heart, but which has been overtaken by the new buildings. And that's why the architect Bodo Hepar built this neo-Renaissance door with an Art Nouveau stained glass window, more in the Viennese style. And also, Bodo Hepar has represented himself here as a Renaissance knight on the right and opposite his wife. Bodo Hepar was quite proud of himself and his art, so he put his signature everywhere, but I think he deserves it. We are now in the vestibule or entrance hall because Mr. Haniel is also mayor of the village, so he used to have his office here. Now it's mine, and we have here, of course, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who must not have been missing from this house. It's thanks to him that we're here today. Here you can see Chancellor Bismarck, whom he was particularly fond of, the imperial family. And here on this photo, we see Mr. Haniel with his large moustache and a display of the Haniel family business, because they also sold coal and fuel oil. We have here on this piece of furniture the portrait of François de Marmier. François de Marmier, who is a hero of French aviation. And so in 1918, Mrs. Widow Haniel was thrown out with her 4 little girls. And during the war, she had set up a rest home for nurses here. The front was not far away, Verdun, etc. And so she had all the honors of the German press, but in 1918 she was thrown out with 2,000 Reichsmark and a small suitcase. And so the French state gave the chateau to François de Marmier, who died in 1932, who bequeathed the chateau to the civil hospices of the city of Metz, who owned it, and in the meantime called it CHR Metz Thionville, and who in the late 80s had other patients to care for than old chateau like this one. And that's when I embarked on the crazy adventure of taking over this house, and we've been working hard ever since. This is the fleet on the Rhine. Then also the Haniel family owned most of the fleet on the Rhine. If you still walk on the Rhine nowadays, you'll see ferries called Franz Haniel, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's still owned by the Haniel family. And here we have Franz Haniel, the founder of the Haniel dynasty. We'll now move on to the basements, where you'll see the drinking room, the wine cellar with a wine fountain, which is quite rare, and also a chapel, which isn't quite a Christian chapel, but was rather an initiatory temple, because Monsieur Haniel was involved in esoteric Masonic initiatory circles. And so if you have a good eye, you'll see a lot of symbolism inscribed in the stone here at Château de Landonvillers. We're now going to explore the basement, which was the level of the former kitchens that are now disused. So here were the pantries and the old kitchens, with electricity that's a little sketchy but still working, shame on me. But we can't afford to do any better at the moment. And now we come to the wine cellar, the Trinkstube or Weinstube. So you know, in the German tradition, you tend to drink a bottle of wine with good friends. So between men in the old days, and so this was the convivial room. And in fact, you can see here these wall paintings, which unfortunately are not frescoes. That's why I got some powder on it. We see scenes of libation, grapes, and then what's exceptional is this wine fountain, which was fed by the pantry above. So there was a barrel, and there's a pull-tab system here, so you could draw wine here at will. It's a bit of a Dionysian myth, so wine flowing freely, it was the good life. Right then, a slightly surprising transition. We're going to move on to the chapel. So the chapel, well, was it really a chapel? When I got here, it was filled to the brim with garbage, which has rotted away here. You can see the wall covering. And we emptied containers and containers here, empty bottles, all kinds of rubbish. And I found this cross, in fact, under this rubbish. I hung it up there and said, this will be the chapel. Moreover, here we have this column capital that shows a cross, but also an inverted triangle, which is more of a Masonic or esoteric symbol representing the earthly plane. Here is the spiritual plane, and here is the earthly plane, and we believe that it was actually more of a Masonic initiation temple rather than a Christian chapel. So it was I who gave or restored the Christian aspect to this place. We're now going back up to the main halls. via this secret staircase. Now we are going to climb up the keep, all the way to the top, to see the collection of ancient icons, both Byzantine and Russian art, a collection that I have assembled myself. I started collecting when I was 16, so I'm neither Russian nor Orthodox. Am I a believer or seriously mystical? I can certainly claim that, and I've been touched by the beauty of these icons, so I'm going to show them to you. There's a big gate here to protect what we are going to see, because there are some treasures waiting for you. So here we're now at the top of the keep. It's well deserved, as there are a few steps to climb. We are here in the former library of the castle, which now houses the collection of ancient icons, including Byzantine and Russian art, the oldest of which dates back to 1450, extending up to the Russian Revolution in 1917. Presumably, it's the largest private collection of early icons in France, if not Europe, and there are still a few more in storage. So to tell you about the iconography, often we think it's just the Virgin Mary, etc., for people who don't really know. So it was used in the Eastern Church primarily as a support for prayer. But the figure represented is considered to be present, meaning that when you enter the home of a family of believers, you greet the icons first and then the head of the household, because similar to the Holy Sacrament, where the presence of Christ is believed to be in the host, here it is the presence of the holy figure in the icon, which was usually painted or written, as we say, by iconographers, often monks, but also lay people who often spent months, even years, painting an icon. So it had two functions. As I said, it was a support for prayer, and it was also used for teaching, because these were often illiterate populations, so they learned the sacred scriptures through these pictorial representations, some icons of which are a little reminiscent of educational comic strips, as I will show you. Here we have Charlemagne. The original was in Metz Cathedral, so it dates from the year 1000. Yeah, but this is a copy, so in fact there was only one copy at Metz Cathedral, and the original is now in the Louvre. So I was telling you about these icons, a little bit like cartoons. Here we have the different religious feasts of the year. And with Anastasia, Easter in the middle, because for the Eastern Church, Easter is the most important feast, whereas for us, or for Catholics, it's more like Christmas. So the iconographer must have painted this for years, using a fine two-hair brush, because with a magnifying glass, you'll see that each face has its own smile, its own true expression. It's absolutely extraordinary. Let me show you now the oldest icon. This one is priceless, dating from 1450, and representing the Trinity of the Old Testament. So it's the moment when Abraham receives 3 strangers one evening. They look a little strange as he gives them something to eat and drink, and then all of a sudden they discover that it's actually the divinity in the form of 3 angels. There are other less amusing motifs, such as the beheading of St. John, as you can see here. And here again is an icon with an illustration, somewhat like an educational comic strip, showing the entire journey of St. John the Baptist up to his beheading. So I'm going to show you another rather exceptional icon. So, for example, this icon doesn't look at all like a traditional icon like this one. It's more in the style of the Italian Renaissance, so in fact I've hung here the Raphael's painting. Because the iconographer was inspired by this painting, it was very much frowned upon by religious authorities. But especially in the 19th century, When St. Petersburg was looking to the west, customers were saying, we don't want an old icon, we want something modern, so we were able to paint these kinds of things, which were in fact very frowned upon, but which were modern. Here we have a showcase of travel icons, because believers often took them along. They had a sort of small triptych that served as a portable altar. And these are baptismal crosses from a family, dating back to the 17th century, which have been incorporated here. And here we also have a travel icon that belonged to Franz Josef Roeder, former minister-president of the Tsar, so he was German, with his initials in silver, so it's quite rare, which I think he must have received on a trip to Eastern Europe. These are elements that were part of a kind of accordion, so it's a kind of iconostasis. They would take this especially to the battlefields. The military used it for religious services, so they had a sort of portable church that they could bring with them to celebrate the services. So here you see this vault with medallions representing the sciences and the arts. So as I was saying, this was the library. Thus the sciences and the arts. So when I arrived here, it was in a very, very, very bad state. We had to scrape it all off. All that rotten plaster that was here, we reattached 4 tons of plaster to the ceiling. We managed to save the medallions, and I met a painter who was restoring frescoes in Venetian palaces. I managed to convince him to come here, and he did an excellent job. Thank you, Pierre. Yes, I wanted to show you also something. I was talking to you about initiatory and Masonic symbols. So here you have this sheep with the letter H, and it would take too long to give you a long lecture on Masonic and initiatory symbolism, which I don't really master though. And on each corner of this room you have another symbol. So here, everything was completely erased on this side, and my restorer who worked on it said to me, you should at least immortalize yourself a bit in this castle Biaco, because everything here was erased by the water that had come in. So he added my initials and the date, which is the date of my arrival here at the castle. So I wanted to show you something else, and this is very private. Normally I never take anyone here because it's my private refuge, but I'll show it to you. As promised, I'm going to show you my refuge here, which no one ever sees. It's a suite in honor of Ludwig II of Bavaria. I quite like him. They say he was a mad king, but I believe he was a poet king above all. And the Holy Lance, which had to be here, is unfortunately just a replica, as the original is in the Hofburg in Vienna. So here we have the fiancée he never married, Sophie Charlotte, who later became the Duchesse d'Alençon and died in the fire at the Bazar de la Charité. Here we have the Gallery of Beauties. Louis II of Bavaria's grandfather was somewhat of a seducer, let's call it that, and so he had portraits painted here on ivory. These are miniatures on ivory of all his lady friends, including the famous Lola Montez, who made her mark on history. In Munich or in the Nymphenburg Palace, you have the same ones painted in oil. So it's quite rare to have this collection on ivory. And here I'm going to show you something extraordinary, which is this room dedicated to Ludwig II of Bavaria, with furniture made by his carpenter. If you go to Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, you'll see exactly the same furniture, the same style of craftsmanship. So it was made by Anton Pössenbacher, who was his favorite carpenter, and we think it was intended for Falkenstein Castle, which was never built. And then it also arrived by very, very strange routes here at Château de Landonvillers, but we'd have to do an additional show to explain this. Now that's a piece of oratory furniture, which is actually rather fantastic, with the infant Jesus of Prague. So this is a rotating one, so we have two sides, as you can see. And then what, of course, should not be missing, it is the Holy Grail. Of course, it's in Landonvillers, so it's a replica that was made in Bayreuth, the Wagnerian temple in the 19th century. The Holy Grail. So this bed is really extraordinary. So you see it's the birth and the entombment. So can you sleep in it, perhaps, meditate in it, or die in it? But it's not really suitable for sleeping. So here we have, of course, the death mask of Ludwig II of Bavaria, and next to it Wagner, and also a replica of his toilet set, which was made many, many years ago by Villeroy and Boch. They did a small re-edition, so I'm very happy to have been able to buy that too, piece by piece. We also have reliquaries here to complement the icons. I like relics. I feel protected by them. They are believed to be miraculous, and they are always useful. You can pray for state subsidies, but it doesn't work very well for me. That was my little secret refuge. Please don't repeat it. So let's get out. Thank you for sharing this moment with me to visit my home, which is a bit exceptional but private. However, I do have a web page. Just type in Château de Landonvillers and you'll find it. On Heritage Days, you can come and see the house, also for groups, and I'm going to open it up again for individuals too. You'll find the information on the internet. Oh yes, it's a bit special to find this in a chateau, so it's a bit of my secret life too. Don't tell anyone. I'm a blues rock guitarist too, so you'd think that maybe a castle owner only does classical music, but no. Well, you're welcome if you're passing through the region. I will be delighted to have you here, and we'll look at some details that you weren't able to discover today. But for now, I wish you all the best.